Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jacob Harrison. I'm a product manager with ESL UK. I'm not going to talk about myself too much, though, I promise. So I am joined on this glorious stage today by one of the best panels I've ever seen in my whole life. I'm really setting them up for a fall. I hope they don't mind. Joe, do you want to start by introducing yourself, and we'll come down the line?
Sure. Hi, I'm Joe Hills. I am the Strategic Partnerships Director for Infinite Esports Entertainment. Infinite is the largest esports holding company in the world. We own Optic Gaming, the Houston Outlaws, as well as have a 360 complement of brand agnostic business units that kind of build up their own self-sufficient esports family based out of Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, my name is Jure Ponnekate. I'm from the Netherlands, as you can hear by my name. I'm the head of esports at Newzoo. Newzoo is a market intelligence firm based in Amsterdam and San Francisco. What we do there is we provide insights into games, esports, and mobile markets on consumer behavior, trending, and tracking what consumers are actually using.
Hi, my name's Summer Malik. I'm from Team Clash. We have about 30 global and Italian national players we represent. I'm in charge of basically the players and influencers, and that's it.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm CMO for Derby County, also director and co-founder of a sports and gaming agency called AMP Global Media. AMP is the brainchild of a co-founder, Mel Morris, who's the founder and creator of Candy Crush, King Digital. We're supporting rights holders create value in their properties, assets, and more importantly, drive value in their audience. Really excited to be here today.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Mike. I run global partnerships at Minute Media, which is a digital sports publishing business. So we own a platform called 90 Min, 12 Up, which are football and American sports, and we've recently entered esports about 9 months ago with our vertical Double Tap.
Thanks, guys. So our topic is understanding the esports demographic. I think where I'd like to start with this is kind of getting an idea of who is in the audience, and I think what I'm super interested to hear from you guys is how you think they differ from a traditional sports audience, and also I think from a traditional gaming audience. Yuri, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So, looking into the esports audience and the viewers, we really see that most of these viewers are, the buzzword is millennials, but what we see is it's 21 to 35-year-old people that are very actively online, very digital-oriented. I think there is a big difference between only traditional sports viewers in that they tend to be older and less digitally active. We see that the esports fans, they communicate online, they have sort of their online social lives, they communicate with friends online. So, and a big difference I would say with gamers is that they are a lot more interactive and maybe more outspoken about the games they play, and they tend to go even more to online platforms to discuss the latest patches, go into Twitch chat and chat with peers. So I think those are some of the main differences there.
Yeah, we actually have a really interesting social audience intelligent tool. It's one of our proprietary businesses. So we ran a report actually last week that surveyed 5 million esport fans globally. It was really interesting, and some statistics won't come as a surprise, but 9 out of 10, 90% actually were male, so massively male dominant. 50% was actually 16 to 24, which is really interesting. All right. My background's engaging youth audiences, and it's a very fragmented audience, and you add into the mix how fragmented esports is, then it really makes brands and rights holders their job more challenging in engaging with those audiences, but they are out there. And I think brands, I think they're looking at this audience probably more so than any other traditional sports. And I come from a traditional sports background. not even football can offer that kind of reach at scale to a demographic that is so young. So it's really interesting. But some other passions that came out, this is an audience that has multiple passion points that can be tapped into. So tech, computing won't come as a surprise, but going deeper into that, gadgets, they're early adopters of tech. They believe tech, can change lives for the better. Traditional sports, over-index in football, tennis, cycling, and basketball. I think really interesting to see, basketball, the NBA take that step in with the NBA 2K, motorsports, with the F1. But movies, TV, online platforms, OTT services, and music. And then going to Gen Z and looking at the differentiating passion points, gadgets is really high, cars, sports, music, film and tech. And the one that over-indexed the most was gambling for that younger audience.
So I come from a traditional sports TV background, doing stuff like Olympics, volleyball, golf, all of that. And what I've noticed is the same thing, is it's very fragmented within esports as well, like you're saying. And the demographic is different from sports in the fact that you wouldn't produce a golf show for the same audience with the same sponsors, the same music, the same shots even, that you would produce a BMX show, right? It would be faster music, faster cuts, faster everything. And in esports, I think you have to really, like you said, like targeting those smaller groups. A game I'm specializing in right now, Clash Royale, a mobile game, the top of their demographic is 17, right? It's like 13 to 17 or something like that. It's really young. And so in the same way that you would treat different sports, you have to treat different games within esports, I think.
I think just one point to add on the back of that. A lot of the times when we talk about the esports industry, we do say that it's super fragmented, but actually, according to some data from Yuri and his team, we're actually starting to see the esports fan be super passionate about more than one title. So either if that's through the expansion of franchise ecosystems with pre-existing teams actually introducing new titles to new fans, but realistically the opportunity for fans to engage with a brand or a team or a sponsor or any actor in the esports industry is actually starting to get a lot more deep and varied, which is always pretty positive to hear.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is about traditional sports. So one of the ways in which we launched Double Tap, we looked at our audience on our football platform, and we asked them a really simple question, which was what were they doing when they weren't watching or playing football themselves, and loads of them were gamers. And FIFA's pretty high, but then there was games like League, Dota, CS. So in terms of them being, they always talked about kind of esports and traditional sports fans, but they're one and the same. I think it's just a subset of them that have that additional passion as well. I think it might be Nielsen. Sorry, have said. I think it's like 60% of the fans they surveyed around key markets were traditional sports fans. It's. I think there's not so much of a distinction between the two. It's just looking at them as a subset.
So I think what you guys have established there quite well is that there is there's a lot of lines between which the audience is fragmented. And the impression I get is that that's not just in terms of game, as in there are different fans for different games, as with different sports, but also, across, I guess, other metrics, like, for example, how they view, how they watch, or what platforms they play on. I think just to round off this discussion about who they are, what do you think is the most... It's a very difficult question to phrase. I think I'm trying to say is, what do you think is the way in which they're most fragmented? Across which line? Is it hardware, software, game, peer group, or and which way are they most unified? What are the things that they all have in common?
I can speak for in Clash Royale, which is one of the biggest mobile games. Basically, it's very fragmented by region. As far as a lot of our players from Italy, a lot of the fans from Italy and from Spain, they don't have a PC. They only have mobile. So everything they consume is via their phone or via the family PC or whatever. But pretty much they consume everything via mobile, as where other countries like the United States, I think they have a much broader range of consumption. So, yeah, I think geographically is a big divide.
I think what fragments them and unifies them is quite the same, and that is still game titles. As Joe mentioned, esports fans don't necessarily only follow one title, they mostly follow multiple games, but those communities of those different games are really unique. So we see that a League of Legends community and Dota, which are of course two clashing games, those are very different, and there are not a lot of people that follow both. Between other games, there's big overlap, but all those sort of game communities, they have their own habits, language, they have their own sort of unique culture, and that gets magnified even more if you look across platforms such as console titles or mobile. Mobile titles indeed skew even more younger, but also are popular in regions which do not have a very large traditional PC industry. So also things like Asia, the Middle East. So I would say those game titles are what fragments them the most. They mostly follow a game title, and that's also what binds them. They're a community of that game title, and that even gets bigger when you look into Clash Royale versus Counter-Strike versus FIFA, for example.
Okay, so now that we have that idea in our heads of who they are, I'd like to dig into a little bit more some of their kind of like key behaviors and the key sort of services that they are likely to use. I think there's a few big names that everybody in the room will recognize, like Twitch, which is on some level responsible for the rise of gaming live streaming, or at least a key player in that. But I think it's one piece of a very complicated puzzle, and I think one of the key things is understanding how those different services interact for the member of the esports audience. So what I'd like to ask, I guess, is which are the key services that you think they use, and why is it those services?
I might be able to tee up when the guys who have the actual stats to back it up, but as far as the user journey, what I found is from being a casual player to discussing these games with your friends to then going to an outside source such as YouTube. YouTube is massive for getting tips, for getting better, for connecting with maybe an influencer that you get the most tips from and you just really connect to them. Then the next stage is if they're live streaming or they're in an event, you follow them to Twitch, and then now you're consuming YouTube and Twitch and pretty much the language of esports, Twitter. That's what I've found to be kind of the journey through the platforms.
Yeah, so I guess the other thing is on those platforms is they're not mutually exclusive. So I think with a lot of them, you talk about Twitch and YouTube, they all have their place in terms of how fans use them. It's just knowing the context of what they use for. So Twitch is for live experiences, YouTube is for on demand, tips, Discord, peer-to-peer chat, Reddit, news. So I think it's that they use all of these different services that maybe if you talk about brands on demos may not have heard of, but it's just understanding what each one has. I don't think they're necessarily always conflicting.
Yeah. The only one to throw in was Imgur, which is a GIF platform. But yeah, absolutely. I think they are actively present on social. So I keep hearing the challenge of reaching it, but they are active. And they're active during the week, weekdays. The perfect time. 6 to 11 o'clock. That's when they're online. Their social calendars are not as active as your traditional sports fan. So they are consuming content between those hours. And I think it's up to brands to actually be creative in how they start to engage and sort of drive the conversation. I think that's that's what I'm seeing where the opportunity is now. Certainly for brands, that want to sort of drive their presence in this space is get creative, and sort of bring those fans deeper into the content, profile sort of the personalities that are out there. I think esports just needs those personalities to come to light. There's a lot of influencers across mainstream sports that they have the very same sort of influence or passions in terms of traditional sports fans. So your average esport fan will follow its hero, just like traditional sport fans. But actually, there's multiple influencers that can be tapped into, that can be brought into that journey, that, if you get creative and overlap different passion points, can ultimately drive that deeper engagement that you're looking for online.
That also plays true for esports players as well. Like, until the last maybe 2 years, you'd see fans actually be a lot more loyal towards a specific player and would actually follow their journey as they move through multiple different teams. With the advent of kind of heavy franchising in League of Legends and in the Overwatch League, you're starting to see the kind of local roots actually be put down a lot more in teams. So based on what region they are in North America, London Spitfire for this local market. One of the teams under our ecosystem is the Houston Outlaws. They are basically just a boy band in esports. They're all like super good looking, super well spoken, and that has led to us actually having 18% of our fan base being purely female, which is super high for esports. So we are looking at kind of products that we can actually position to that market from a merchandising standpoint, but because there is now this kind of local responsibility and an ownership of an area. So we have Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. From a marketing side, we have to do interesting activations and marketing campaigns with our local fans, actually really bring them together, because esports went global first, and we're now having to backfill this infrastructure at the local level. So we launched a campaign called Band Together, where last weekend we actually shut down a street in Houston and had just a massive block party. There were about 1,000 people there. Merchandise was just flying out of there. There was chants of T-Mobile, which is one of our most recent sponsors. The fans were chanting that as we were winning our game, which was just, that kind of engagement for brands, like on a team perspective, is literally unheard of. And that kind of just extends on from the brand point. You've seen ESL do such fantastic work over the last few weeks, signing the HL and like a local partner in sorry, I stammer sometimes. In the local market, and like a huge amount of sponsors, but the solid differentiator there between a TO and a publisher is that your brand focus will always be in the broadcast, but the narrative, the emotional connection, and the story will always be with the teams and with the players. So that's a really exciting kind of point that we are in with the industry as a whole, which we're all super excited to see how that grows and that matures over the next few years.
No, it's a really fantastic statistic that you got such a high demographic, female demographic there, which the 5 million people that we surveyed, 90% were male, which is not saying that this is not an industry that just to get to target male esport fans, because if you turn that on its head and you look at the casual gaming audience, then the pendulum swings. You've got a 65% female dominance in that casual gaming. So those that are playing maybe one casual game for 4 hours per month, there's a 200 million Gen Z audience out there that are casual gaming. So I don't want to put any brands that are in the room or any industries that are looking to get into this space. There's both genders of the male and females are participating, and they're there to be engaged with. So I think I keep again hearing this. I'm having conversations that it's a male dominated sport. There is female representation definitely out there.
Yeah, what you say is really interesting, because when I did the Do Tour which was skateboarding, BMX, and whatever. And they were always focusing on the guys. But then you have Ryan Sheckler, who, if anyone knows Ryan Sheckler, he was like the heartthrob of skateboarding. And he brought all these female viewers and all these female fans to the event. And it was really amazing. I said, why aren't we doing that across the board? I mean, for the women here, when they were teenagers, they probably, maybe if they were my age, had posters on the wall of their favorite people. And like Tony Hawk was like a heartthrob to me, even though he wasn't a heartthrob. But he was like, so I said, if you kind of approached the sports that way, which is kind of might sound anti-feminist of me, but no, I had the biggest crush on these guys, and I followed everything Leonardo DiCaprio did and all of this stuff. And I said, if we could do the same thing with our athletes, our skateboarders, our BMXers, we would have a huge audience. And they did that with Ryan Sheckler, and that's what happened. The female audience exploded.
I think what started there as a conversation about services online kind of exploded into something actually a lot more varied and complicated, and something that involves influencers and something that involves shutting down streets now apparently is an industry practice as well. I think that speaks to how the audience is something that's in transition, and also the rise of kind of like more of a higher female audience. Traditionally, we've seen obviously predominantly male audience. So as with everything in esports, as they spoke about in the keynote earlier, we're in flux. And nobody quite knows what it's going to look like when it's finished, but we know it isn't finished yet. In that context, if I'm a brand or an organization looking to basically get involved, this is an intimidating prospect. It's an intimidating prospect even if we just base everything on the stereotypes. So I think one of the biggest questions is how should we communicate with these people? And that's in terms of the concrete methods we use, whether that's through a particular service or, I don't know, a mailing list. I wouldn't recommend, but it could also be an option. And also in the tone we use and the language we use. Would somebody like to sort of contribute on that sort of subject?
I think what is massively important for any brand that goes into esports is understand the different languages that all these communities have, how they communicate with each other, what they find interesting, funny, what they find cool, what is normal, and don't only, with like traditional sports, what works there, try to just pinpoint it on an esports community, because that most of the time is not as sort of successful as really understanding what a community is and what their own language is. I think what's important there for any brand is to work with someone with a lot of experience in esports that probably can tell you, how that language looks like. And I think there have been very good examples. I think this week saw a very short video of Dr. Pepper with TSM, who then portrayed like the TSM team as the old Power Rangers, and it went massive on Twitter. Everybody loved it. It's their language. They used to love the Power Rangers. These are their heroes. Seeing their heroes portrayed as a Power Ranger, it was like a 10-second video or something. Everybody loved it. So I think those examples or that type of messaging, that's really crucial as a brand, because this is a highly engaged audience. They're very interactive on these platforms, and if you do well, they will also talk about you doing well and endorse you and say how good you did.
I was really fortunate to work at Red Bull previously before joining Derby. I spent 3 years managing the sport and culture program there in the UK, and that brand, there's no other brand like it in terms of how they communicate and connect with consumers in the market. And I think there's a lot of learnings from that approach. How if you look at Red Bull and their presence in esports, I don't know if you could distinguish them between an endemic or a non-endemic. They're clearly a beverage brand, so they're non-endemic. But because they've been around, they've created significant value from the start. And I think that's the challenge. I think organizations, brands have to be brave. They have to dive deep into this scene, and they have to be in it for the long haul. It's a digital audience with a digital with a digital sport that is highly sophisticated and discerning. And I think if brands go in it half-hearted and are not willing to be creative and get to know the audience and drive that deeper sort of engagement, I mean, these fans are crying out for customized brand integration. They're not put off by brands coming into this space. So I think, for me, I see that as a huge opportunity, but I think it needs to be done in the right way. There has to be a really strong value proposition. You have to build envy. I think you have to give them a new perspective. I think brands that can do that, and the non-endemics, I think we'll see them coming in their spades over the next 12 months, because they don't really need to come in. They come in sort of unblinkered as well, and I actually think that's the best approach. They're coming in to this scene. They're not conditioned. They'll come in, and I think it's there to be capitalised on. The brands that want to take the risks and create the most amazing, immersive, engaging content and challenge this audience are the ones that are going to drive and ultimately monetize from their engagement.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with everything said. The one thing, really, advice to brands would be just partner with people that know the space. So, whether it's a team or tournament organizer or content creator, it's actually just partner. So, it can be quite daunting when you look at the audience and, you see the stats from Newzoo and Nielsen, see the size of it, but then want to actually insert your brand. You need to work with people that understand that. So, if you look at the stuff like Mercedes did with ESL, really good work. And I'd probably dare if they tried to do that by themselves, that probably wouldn't have gone quite so well. There are a lot of people in the space who understand esports, the teams, the demographics. If you're a brand and you want to target a big audience, you'll know people in the space who will say, well, don't go for specific games. These are the markets you want to target. So go for particular types of games, or these are the age ranges. And I just think that's the thing for brands. They do need to be bold, but I think it's working with people who actually understand that space and understand how to do it properly and credibly in order for that to be a success. Because if it goes wrong, ultimately what they look at is that was a failure, and brands then do step back. So that'd be my one thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. Audience-led, content-driven, platform-enabled. It's a mantra I keep driving with my team. I think if that's the challenge, and if you get that right, and they become platform enabled, because you need to talk to these guys on their own terms, because it's fragmented. You need to find those niche websites and niche publisher digital hangouts. This audience is on, and then give them some content to engage. You wouldn't publish that content. Why? I think you look at that and you challenge yourself. Actually, would I consume this content? If the answer is no, then it's likely it's not going to perform.
I think when people had the conversation about brands risking something by moving into esports, I don't necessarily agree with that's how you should be best approaching the situation, because risk is ultimately always reduced when you understand more about the situation that you're going to be moving into. So a massive aspect for us from the team side, and also just working with all of our partners and the esports industry as a whole, has been the process of evolution by how sales and sponsorship for the last, say, 10, 12 years has been endemic, PC-based or scuff controllers, that sort of thing, and it's just been logos on a shirt, and it's been like a small bit of content, and that's really been it. Realistically, that doesn't add a lot of value to fans. It doesn't realistically add a lot of value to the brands themselves. So as the kind of momentum of the space has really started to evolve in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, we've seen a massive amount of learning from our side, and also from the brands that are starting to look at esports. I would probably say that if you're a CMO in any household name brand at the moment and you haven't heard the word esports actually crop up in conversation yet, then you're probably not actually doing your job right. Even if we're not ready, there should definitely be some form of kind of thought leadership exercise, or you're at least trying to understand the ecosystem in a little bit more detail. Understanding what brands want, what kind of long 3 to 4, maybe even 5-year plan that they have to speak to your audience is super important. And I think that esports has kind of been in this more naive gear where they just think that we have a massive audience. I could sit here and spout that Optic Gaming has, like, we say 17 million across all social media. But what does that really mean to a brand? Where's the engagement? Where's the impressions? What's the unique story behind our audience rather than any esports audience? So there's a massive amount of education on either side about how we speak to our fans, how we understand our fans, and also how we bring brands along that journey and learn as a collective along the way. So that's why, that's basically my point. But I don't know how to finish, so I'm going to look away.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks, everybody. Caroline, I think we've got some questions.
Right, I have one here, so I'm just going to open it up to all of you guys. So it seems like in esports, despite a tech-savvy audience, VR and AR haven't really taken off. What do audiences think, and is this really the future?
I dream pretty big with VR. I see the kind of sports stadiums of the future being filled with, fans in the seats with AR goggles on and like a form of BR being played on a sports field. Now, don't ask me for a strategy about how we get there in the next 30 years. That's just kind of where I want us to be. But from the Outlaws perspective, we actually we had a partnership with Sansar, which were the devs behind Second Life, which is one of the biggest kind of first MMOs. And we built this Outlaws branded clubhouse where we could have all of our fans driving in there. They could have viewing parties together. They could play games with each other. They could meet the players in like an outsourced way. And that was going to be awesome until Blizzard said we couldn't do that. But that's the kind of potential of that kind of technology with our audience. Is everyone has been global, as I've said about 3 times now. We're trying to bring everyone together. We might as well use the technology that's available to bring our fans together, and then also you can build a business proposition on top of that as well for sponsors and everyone else. So it's a win-win, I think.
So I'd argue yes, probably does have a place. I don't think anyone really knows what that looks like. I think it has been or starts to be done in traditional sports. So Intel have done a great job with things like TrueView. I think the difference when it comes to esports is obviously everything that's versus traditional sports. Everything's happening on a screen in something digital already. So it's a slightly different approach. So if I was to hazard a guess, I'd probably say that the likes of VR, if it's for kind of viewing experiences, would be around stadiums and just bringing that atmosphere that you get when you come to something like ESL into the home of people who are watching something on Twitch, just add to that experience. But honestly, I don't think anyone really knows what that's going to look like for a good few years.
Do we have any more questions from you guys? Surely we must have one more. We can't just have one question. You have the people here that know all about the demographics of esports. You can ask them any single thing that you want. Do we have one question from someone? We've got 2 questions. Even more exciting. All right, I'm going to have to come over to you. Am I going to do that? Okay. Tell me what to do that. Yeah.
Just a question to Dan, please. You mentioned gambling. Can you tell us any more about that demographic?
Yeah, it was one of the passion points that over-indexed with Gen Z. So not so relevant with the sort of more mature millennial, but it crosses over in the traditional sports space as well. Gambling is one of the sort of highest passion points for that audience, and I think with that it does bring a huge opportunity. But the betting brands in the traditional sports space at the moment have to and are starting to get creative and finding those online ways to engage the audience. It's really interesting. I've been working with one of the largest betting brands in the UK, spending 6 million plus in the market, and return on investment is minimal because they're serving static images and expecting consumers to engage with these posts, and it's the same generic posts going across 10 plus large rights holders accounts. And that's where I think gaming and esports can really bring that audience into the mix, because they're already online, they're consuming, and if you find the right mechanics to engage, I think that type of spend will start to shift into esports, and then it gets really interesting. They're already starting to look at esports at the next sector. So you see multiple brands, multiple betting brands start to build their presence. So it's a really interesting time. I think certainly another interesting non-endemic that will soon enter the market.
Also, hello? Oh, hi. From a macro level, you've just seen a massive shift in the North American market with the US government actually opening up the doors for a little bit more flexibility around that side. And because a lot of the main publishers are based there, regardless of what they might want to do in the local market, they haven't been able to. Now that gate is open, you're going to see a lot more width of opportunity for service providers to actually start building some more specific products that speak to an esports audience. One of the actually local-based companies that I've spoken to before is Blinkpool. They've built a in-game crossover over Dota 2 where you can build odds around the unique things that are happening in game, based who's going to take a tower next, who's going to kill this guy next, who's going to feed and then rage quit the game next, hopefully. So those kind of ideas and those products, they enhance the fan experience, which is what everyone should be focusing on, either from a gambling perspective or if you're looking to bring in a new partner. Everything should be driving the quality of life for fans across the ecosystem.
Cool, yeah. This was about platform. Mobile versus PC, essentially, to split it easily. Are we seeing, everywhere else in the world, we're seeing massive trends towards mobile dominance? Are we seeing the same in esports? And if so, where does it differentiate? And how are the viewer habits changing?
Yeah, it's interesting. From the survey results that came back last week, and that's just a week old, the actual esport fan, so that's any one of the 5 million that was consuming esports fans live or non-live in terms of that content, and they preferred desktop over mobile. So desktop was still the preference in terms of how they were consuming the content, but different markets, there's different shifts taking place. If you go to India, mobile video consumption is booming through the roof, and that will change how the consumers in that market are consuming media. But I think it's an interesting one. But still, esport fans, because of gaming and how they're just so used to playing games and watching games on desktops. But I think that will change slightly.
And I think still in Europe and across the world that not everyone has a PC, but everyone has a mobile. And so maybe it's not even I could see preference would be far superior watching something on this than on my phone. But the accessibility has to be massive for mobile, and only getting better as better content comes available for mobile, right?
Yeah, I think what to add to that is that viewing on your mobile, like any type of content, whatever platform, is already quite big. Desktop is still the biggest, but it's already quite relevant. I think if you specifically look into mobile esports, we see massive growth there, mostly in Asia, specifically China. Biggest game there is Honor of Kings, Tencent game. It's huge. It already fills up stadiums in a lot of other Asian countries. India, mobile is big. So those mobile-first worlds already lead the way in terms of that mobile esports part. In the Western, that's still developing a bit more. But as mentioned, the accessibility of the mobile screen, as well as a lot of the even younger generations, maybe not even growing up with having a PC anymore, gaming on a PC, I see mobile having a very huge future in the esports scene as well, both as a viewing as playing platform.
Yeah, just to add to that, India and China, as you mentioned, there is a real rise of vernacular languages out there. In India, there's 10 plus languages. So it's something to think about when you are starting to activate and you're geographically targeting consumers in those markets. That you can't just blanket approach. You have to optimize that content for the audience that you're trying to target in that specific market. In that specific market, so it requires a little bit more work, but obviously you get the much greater returns, and that's mobile is more accessible. Consumers are consuming non-live content on their mobile more. They may still be watching desktop of a live event, but you need to optimize the content that you are putting out there. So it needs to be the right spec. It needs to be formatted for mobile and for desktop. It needs to be subtitled. There's all these little tricks of the trade that is going to ensure that your content gets viewed and helps with your algorithms and your engagement scores that organically boost your content.
There's one more point to add on that. From a social mobility standpoint of actually having the maximum amount of inclusion mobile, absolutely. Should be much more adopted in the Western market. This is kind of just a bit of a blunt sell, really. But we just announced our Optic India CSGO team. It's one of the first big Western teams to even put any form of focus on these more evolving kind of pure esports markets. And that's going to be something that we're going to be taking really seriously over the next few years, is how can we start to build these small little pockets of Optic or Outlaws fans across the world. I would love to see more teams actually doing that. Mobile is going to be huge, especially when we actually get some good internet over here. That would be great. But I don't think that we should limit how high we're dreaming to get, top tier esports everywhere in the world. I mean, if it's a place that can bring people together across all different social groups on a global basis, then that's pretty powerful. I mean, you can already see the huge amount of social change and positivity that's done through sport as a way to bring people together, and I think esports can definitely be that too. So we should be dreaming big.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there, but that was really, really insightful from all of you. I think it's really important to understand the demographic, obviously, and if you're trying to get involved in the esports space, it's really important to know who that audience is, then that way you can tailor-make how you approach them and what will work with them. So thank you to all of you. Give them a big round of applause, everyone.